All right, it's the hour when we are scheduled to start. I know there's some late stragglers, so we'll dawdle for just a moment here. As you are joining, please introduce yourself in the chat box so that we know who is with us today as we dive into this topic. We are really lucky to have this incredible panelist. The only bummer is we only have an hour. I wish we had like an entire day, but we're all fast talkers, so we will make the most use of it. Welcome everybody. I see Susan Roth is here. Others, please just introduce yourself in the chat box as we're going. Also check the chat box regularly. We will be putting links and resources in there about this topic. So good morning, folks. I'm Annie Leonard. I'm the Executive Director of Greenpeace US and an enormously enthusiastic fan of the Climate President campaign. So I was so thrilled to be invited to moderate this session. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know Netroots has a lot of fascinating things, and you were very smart to pick this one. There is a lot of discussion right now about the election and mapping out different scenarios, and we don't know what's going to happen at the election. And to be honest, there is no option that is really soul-stirring, inspiring, or even close to awesome left anymore. So we know that. But some of the options of what might happen are downright terrifying. So a lot of groups are mapping out these different scenarios and figuring out what we're going to do. But there's a couple things that we know we need to do regardless of who's in that Oval Office next year. The first thing that we know is that if any of the current candidates are in that Oval Office, neither of them are going to move on climate without a massive movement to force them to act at the scale that the science demands. We know that irrespective of the election outcome. The second thing that we know, irrespective of the election outcome, is that climate action won't succeed. It won't succeed politically, and it won't succeed chemically and physically in the actual world if it does not have equity and justice at its core. And that includes racial justice and gender justice and Indigenous rights and ensuring a just transition for fossil fuel dependent workers and communities. That has to be non-negotiable because climate is not just a technological problem. And the third thing that we know is that moving any climate legislation at all through the Senate is a long shot for a lot of reasons. So given all of that, an increasing number of climate activists, including the superstars that we have with us here today, are focusing on getting ready for executive action. As we saw in this last administration in the wrong direction, there's a lot of potential for executive action quicker and bolder than we can get through going through Congress, which we're going to talk about today. There's also not just a lot of potential, there's a lot of urgency. The science is very clear that we have just over about a decade to reduce our fossil fuel consumption by about half and then keep reducing it down to zero in coming decades. So that means that when the new president takes office, we will have roughly 10 years left to reduce fossil fuels in half. And coincidentally, we have 10 executive actions that we would like that new president to do. So one proposal is that we put the new president on notice. We have 10 years, you have 10 days. And this list of 10 executive actions is all completely scientifically backed up, morally compelling, economically sound, like they are no-brainers. And delaying at this point is morally and scientifically indefensible. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do we build the movement to hold the new president accountable to implement these executive actions and save the planet. So our panel includes amazing climate activists from these, working on these fronts from all over the country. I'm really excited because I have learned a huge amount from everybody on this panel. As I said, my only bummer is I wish we could spend the entire day talking, because each has a really extensive bio. I would use up the whole hour if I read them all. And so I'm gonna ask each of the panelists to take 2 minutes to introduce themselves and the part of their work that is most relevant to our topic today. So let's start with Jean.
Great, Annie, thank you for the enthusiastic, incredible introduction. Hi, everyone. I love everyone I can see on screen here, and I am so excited that you're all here. I wish I could see your faces. My name is Jean Sue. I am the Energy Justice Director and an attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity Action Fund. A lot of words in there, but I helped draft the Climate President paper that we have. And I believe we'll put that platform in the website right now. Thank you very much. Please go check that out. That is what Annie was talking about in terms of top 10 actions that we need our next president to do in the first 10 days of, unfortunately, his his office. So, you know, where we are right now, I just want to take a step back and just recognize how heartbreaking this moment is in time. I don't know about everyone else. I am absolutely exhausted and heartbroken. And right now, we are seeing the place where climate, systemic racism, and COVID-19 are all together in one space. And we can read the news every day and just being entirely moved and heartbroken about it. But we actually have the tools with us to fucking address it. I'm sorry, I use the F word a lot, but now is the time. This is the time for a portal. This pandemic, these triplets of pandemics, are the time where we need to actually press the restart button and say, hell no, we need to move on climate, move on systemic racism. COVID-19 has revealed everything and how screwed up the United States is and the rest of the world, especially for climate. So that's what we're going to be talking about today in terms of executive action. I'm going to be particularly focused on emergency action. Happy to talk to everybody about the National Emergencies Act and the Defense Production Act, as well as transitioning our electricity system to be 100% clean, but also democratic and distributed, which is actually absolutely key to our energy future. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean. Tamara, please introduce yourself. Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Awesome. My name is Tamara Tolzo-Laughlin. I'm the North America Director at 350.org and the North America Director at 350 Action. So I'll be here with the 350 Action hat on. The thing I'm most concerned about is how the tendency towards urgency can usher in deeper white supremacy. And regardless of the action that gets pushed forward, if it isn't taken through with an equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion lens, we will end up fighting ourselves on the way to getting nowhere. So I'm particularly interested in keeping fossil fuels in the ground, stopping exports, and no longer paying for it with all of our money. Happy to talk about that more later.
Thank you so much. It sounds like you just summarized much of the climate movement for the last 10 years with that fear. All right, Adrian.
Hi, thank you, Annie, so much. And really excited to be on this panel with all of these amazing comrades. My name is Adrian Salazar, and I am a climate justice advocate. I was born in the Philippines and grew up in Tamian and Ohlone land in the Bay Area of California. I live now on Mansi, Lenape, and Wappinger occupied territory, which is now New York City. I'm a senior campaign strategist at Demos, and I have had the pleasure to work with everyone on this panel fighting for climate justice solutions that are equitable and center racial justice. And by way of introduction, let me just say that a lot of us work on climate policy, and it's a very heady space, especially this topic, you know, executive and regulatory action. But the threat of climate crisis, I know for many of us, is palpable. For myself, I have family in the Philippines who have to confront the monsoon season, the typhoon season every year, as well as family in California who deal with the wildfires that are getting more and more intense. So we know the stakes are incredibly high, and the window we have to actually meet this crisis at the scale that we need to do it is getting narrower. And fortunately, we actually have the solutions that we need to address this. We know what it takes. It's going to take a massive economic transition and economic mobilization. And a lot of communities on the ground have the solutions to get to that economy, a regenerative economy, a renewable economy. And what we really need to talk about are what are the specific policy hooks that we can attach to and leverage to mobilize the entire apparatus of our government to confront this crisis. So I'm very excited to talk about some of these actions that Annie and Jean have highlighted, and as well as those that specifically are invested in addressing inequality as well, because we know that the climate crisis is an inequitable crisis, and we have to address environmental justice and climate justice.
Excellent. Thank you, Adrian. Anthony.
Good morning, everyone. I'm embarrassed that my sister Jean beat me to the F-bomb contest. She gets the gold medal. But Annie, so good to see you. You know, I've been a big fan for so many years. Thank you so much for your leadership. We get to work with some of your people at Greenpeace, Sister Janet, Charlie, and we love you. Always amazing to be here with these just amazing people who are friends, comrades, teachers, confidants, and whatnot, including my brother Michael Leon Guerrero, who's been a teacher of mine for some years. I'm Anthony Rogers Wright. I'm a policy coordinator with the Climate Justice Alliance. We are an organization of over 70 frontline grassroots organizations throughout the country, including Indian country and the U.S. colonies of Puerto Rico and Guam. I do have to say on the onset that I am speaking for myself and not on behalf of CJA and its members today, who may or may not agree with some of the things that are going to come out of my mouth. You know, that said, just building off of what Jean and Adrian said, we know that right now for our people, Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, poor, white folk, that the 4 C's that are killing our people, not to be confused with the C4s, is COVID, climate change, cops, right, and capitalism. And so what we have here is a real opportunity to use executive action to really keep moving the needle. Some of the victories and semi-victories that we have enjoyed over the last few months, including the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, had to do with Executive Order 12898. The judges, when they struck down a permit for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, said specifically that environmental justice cannot be a box that you just check off. And that was huge, and that was like a big victory. So, you know, my interest in working with Sister Jean and Brother Adrian, you know, on executive actions is, you know, executive actions also can spark discussions and light a fire under Congress's butt to actually pass the laws that we need. We know that, like, right now, frontline communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous people, they're just surrounded with all kinds of iniquities, and we're going to need everything in the arsenal, from legislation to direct action to incredible base building and organizing. And we can do this in the first 10 days, as Sister Jean was saying, in the first 100 days, to really send a message to the country that we mean business. We are going to declare a climate emergency, and we are also going to you know, declare an emergency for the slow genocide impacting our Indigenous sisters and brothers. And we're also going to use executive action to finally have a real discussion about reparations for descendants of African slaves in this country, for back pay for women who have done all kinds of care work that has been undervalued. And this is what I'm interested in particularly, is using the executive action mechanism to create a platform of justice as a way to confront, address, and dismantle the apparatus of white supremacy. So good to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. And we're going to dive into how we do that. We have one more introduction. Michael.
Yes, thanks, Annie. And everybody, just want to echo the appreciation of being able to be on this panel with everybody. I've had the opportunity to work closely with pretty much everybody on this panel over the last year, and truly everybody here is a rock star and a mover and shaker. So it's a real honor to be on this panel with y'all. My name is Michael Leon Guerrero. I'm originally from the island of Guam that Anthony mentioned, now living in Albuquerque, New Mexico for pretty much the last 30 years. I'm currently the executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability. And we're an organization of unions and other worker organizations, individuals and allies. Our mission is to build a movement for a future that is ecologically sustainable and economically just. And prior to LNS, I was national coordinator for the Climate Justice Alliance and the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. And for many years, a community organizer here in New Mexico, focusing on environmental justice issues. For LNS, our focus is on workers and how they are affected now by the climate crisis, and how they will be in an economic transition to a sustainable, regenerative economy. And for the past few months, we've been organizing a process called the Just Transition Listening Project. So far, we've interviewed nearly 50 workers, union, and community leaders who've been through economic transitions, who are going through them now or anticipate that they will be. And our goal is to inform policy and program development on just transition and support a national network of workers and community leaders to organize for truly just transitions. And now with 40 million people on unemployment and many of those jobs not coming back, this issue now takes on an even greater scale and sense of urgency. So we feel the President of the United States in 2021 can help address this crisis by issuing an executive order, establishing an interagency just transition task force. And then just real quickly, thinking back on important presidential executive orders throughout history, I mean, the Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order. FDR established the Works Progress Administration, the National Labor Relations Board through executive order. And then, of course, there was the Environmental Justice Executive Order of Bill Clinton. So these are all good examples, I think, of executive orders that had a major significant impact. And I was around when the EJ executive order was passed. So I think there's a lot of lessons that we can take from that experience, both good and challenging, that we should take into account. And then, of course, CBD has been doing some terrific work around the executive orders issued by President Trump around DPA that unfortunately they haven't really followed through with. So anyway, yeah, looking forward to this conversation and being part of this with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, MLG. I feel so full, like just my heart feels so full after just hearing the introductions, the passion, the expertise. Once again, panelists, thank you so much, not just for joining us today, but for your work in the world. That last 10 minutes was the best antidote to catching up on the news from last week. Could have imagined. So thank you. Remind folks to please introduce yourself in the chat if you have joined us recently. And if you have any questions for our panelists, put it in the Q&A box down below, and then we'll save the last 10 minutes or so to try to get to audience questions. And our panelists will try to answer some as we go along. So questions in the Q&A, introductions, resources, links, things you want to share in the chat box, please. All right, I've got some questions for each of you. My first question is for Jean and Tamara, which is, what is executive action? What does that even mean? This is a new approach for a lot of people. And what are the advantages of going the executive action route compared to working through Congress on climate? How would it actually work? What are some examples? What do you mean by executive action on climate? Jean, you want to start, and then we'll pass it over to Tamara?
Sure, that sounds great. So executive action, I think under this Trump administration, we've seen a lot of examples of it. I'm sure it shocked a lot of people. But basically, we've got our three branches of government. We've got Congress, who passes laws and who actually delegated a ton of powers to the president to execute. The president is the executive branch, and that person basically has his entire federal government of agencies, including everyone from Department of Homeland Security to EPA administrator, all those people to execute on certain things that Congress has wanted. And then we finally have judges. So it is that second column that we are most excited about. And the executive actions that we are calling for in our different platforms are essentially lawfully delegated pieces of power that Congress passed to give to the president. So everything that we are asking for is within the lawful bounds of this country. I would have to say that the Trump administration has actually crossed those bounds and has done things under his executive actions that are completely illegal that I've personally litigated against, including the border wall. But what we are asking for is different. So what are the types of things that we are asking for? We're all going to go into some of them, but let me just unpack a few that are important. The first is to call for a national climate emergency under the National Emergencies Act. And just to take a step back here, we are facing the existential emergency of our generation and so many generations and past generations. So this is an emergency. And in the United States, the president can call an emergency, which unlocks so many different other types of actions that make us get our shit together. And so what that means is that, for example, 5 years ago, the Congress basically opened up our ports again to export gas, to export fracked gas. The president actually has the ability, once he calls on the National Emergency Act, to put a kibosh on that and say, we are banning our exports on fracked gas, which is screwing over and harming so many people within the United States. He also has the ability, the next president, to say, hey, we're going to call an emergency. Now we're actually going to shift funds to basically build out a renewable energy system that is distributed and solar, and that is democratic and is just. So these are just some types of emergency actions. And one of the biggest kind of benefits of this is that it is lawfully delegated and it is fast. So Congress is slow. We all know that. They have already delegated these types of powers to the president. So we are using the existing framework to actually get things done. And we're not saying that executive action is the only lone thing. It needs to work together with Congress, with movements on the ground, with the judiciary system to make this all happen. So I'll pass it off to Tamara from here.
Sure. I just want to do a little grounding and context setting. When we're talking about the executive, we've established that there are 3 branches of government. The president can do a little more than a handful of things. We have felt every one of them. He can veto. He can take care that the laws are faithfully executed, which has a lot more to do with putting things into the Federal Register that happen versus sending out a tweet. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Treaty power. They deliver the State of the Union address. They're the commander-in-chief of the United States. Military forces, they handle appointments over ambassadors back not too long ago when we used to have a functioning State Department. Just want to flag there. Also able to pardon people. If you don't feel the pain of that happening, you must have been in a coma over the last couple of years. Also want to flag that they have the power to call special sessions of Congress to accomplish all of those things. So just wanted to make sure we're starting in a place where everybody understands that the president's ability to make things happen in the federal government space and influence the ability of states to respond to that by moving money, setting the tone, or making it difficult for people to do business by virtue of creating bureaucratic bulwarks or blockages is a really important thing that we're talking about here. In terms of climate actions that we want to see the next president take, this is really important because it is a slow-moving dinosaur, the government. And in order to have people clear on what direction we're going in, to release the kinds of power that have to happen across the public and private sector to move money and people, you have to have a sense that you're going in a direction, and the president sets the tone for that. So anything that the president can do to say we are dismantling fossil fuel infrastructure and supporting the development of a new economy will enable tons of other people across sectors to start that work. So having a president that doesn't read and is intractable is not that useful. So we're looking to change that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm glad you talked about the urgency. I find that there are fewer and fewer politicians who will outright deny climate these days. There are still, sadly, some, but climate delay is the new climate denial. And with the time frame that we have left, there is no material difference between delaying on climate and denying on climate. So thank you for raising that. There's lots more to dig back into what you said, but we'll keep moving and then we'll come back to discussions. Thank you, both of you, very much. My next question is about timing. The country is facing multiple intersecting, deeply damaging crises right now. There's COVID-19, the economic downturn, the uprising for Black lives. There's the attacks on democratic space and democratic institutions. I'm sure you're all watching what's happening to the post office. It's just unbelievable, as well as the accelerating climate crisis. With all of these crises going on right now, why prioritize executive action on climate in this context? And we'll start with Anthony.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sister Annie. I mean, I think that your question in itself is the answer to that question. What we've understood, at least these amazing people who I get to work with, is that we cannot operate in silos and say we're going to prioritize this issue, you know, and then get to that issue. And then Sister Jean said earlier, like we cannot depend on the pace of Congress. Congress has just gone home until after Labor Day, while there are people who are still unsure about like their money, their children in school, and things like that. So I mean, they've proven to be derelict in their duties. And this also just gives us a stronger ability to organize. We have one target, the executive branch, and we can bring, you know, people together to hold the hopefully the next administration's feet to the fire in a way that is very, very quick, because this is extremely dire. This isn't just about like numbers and you know, stock market going up and down. This is like actual lives. We all know either someone vicariously or personally who has succumbed to COVID-19, who has experienced police police violence who has asthma or some sort of respiratory disease because they live in a frontline or fence line community. Brother Michael, who's also going to take this question as well, lives in New Mexico, where we know that COVID has been just devastating Navajo people who were already dealing with tainted water supplies from uranium mining. So all of these things have to be handled with synergy and with strategy and you know, with just like expedience. So I would say that you know, using the executive action, it's an incredible tool that not only gets us some injunctive relief very, very quickly, but sparks the conversation for other things that need to happen. You know, for instance, Michael referenced Executive Order 12898, which is environmental justice. You know, now what we're saying is that, you know, it's done some good things, but we have to build on that and not just address environmental justice, but we have to mitigate environmental racism as well. And this is a mechanism. I mean, I hate to say it, but this is the first time I might even throw up in my mouth when I say this, but thank you, President Trump, because like we're going to do the same thing, except that instead of oppression, we're going to use executive action for justice.
Can you just give us one quick example of what is a type of example of an executive action that addresses climate and advances equity at the same time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we can start by creating a commission to assist the United Homa Nation and the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe whose land is sinking in Louisiana. Or we can make an executive action that orders those oil and gas companies to restore the wetlands as they promised to do years ago before Bobby Jindal let them off the hook. That's going to address a lot of equity because we're saving land and we're saving sovereign indigenous territory as well. And to me, that's the most equitable thing that you can do, is acknowledge that stolen land needs to be restored and then returned to the original people.
Thanks. That example is really tangible and helps us conceptualize it. Michael, can you please talk about your work with labor around these issues and why climate is so important and how we can ensure that we are advancing equity as we move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Annie. And thanks, Anthony, for that. And Tamara, what you said in regards to the president setting the tone, I think is really critical in terms of this, because that is from day one what the president can do, is establish the absolute priority of climate issues and just transition and protections and rights for workers and communities and Native nations. A president that steps up and actually declares that from day one sends a message, you know, that he is serious. Unfortunately, as Jane said, he is serious about doing this. Definitely the urgency is, you know, I think you set the tone on that, Annie, with and 40 million people that are unemployed right now, and many of those jobs not coming back in various sectors. So we're not just fossil fuels, you know, we're not just talking about that sector. We're talking about the hospitality industry. We're talking about the service industry. Many workers across the board may not see their jobs come back at all. And in the history of this country, we have not done transitions well, economic transitions. I mean, going all the way back to Reconstruction was an economic transition that that was not done well or in a just way. You can even say it's incomplete. Reconstruction was never really a completed project. You know, and even coming out of the New Deal, there were many things that were not, you know, did not address equity and the exclusion from workers being, getting the benefits of those. So there have been programs that have been effective and that have been useful, but at the scale that we're talking about right now, and the urgency that we're talking in terms of millions of people being out of work, this country just has not done well throughout its history. So the executive order that we're proposing is that there be this interagency task force on just transition. So again, to kind of set the tone, but also start to get people in place, get the agencies thinking about what they can be doing to deal with this crisis at the scale that it needs to be. And the advisory process to that is going to be really critical in terms of who's informing those decisions and those policies. And what we've been finding is that there are people throughout this country that are really tremendous resources that have been doing a lot of work and thinking around transitions that can inform that. And it has to be very diverse, from Native nations like Anthony mentioned, from you know, many of our movements in terms of people of color, rights organizations and civil rights organizations, that it has to be a very broad, diverse effort, and everybody needs to start, taking that into account right now in terms of their work. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Michael. I feel like as an environmental activist for 30 years, I can speak on behalf of us. One of the many mistakes our movement has made was not really embracing deep collaboration with labor early on. And I feel like we have made some great, I mean, there were notable exemptions, God bless Tony Mazzocchi and others, but Michael, the work that you and Labor Network for Sustainability has done to help repair that misstep and build new bridges has just been transformative. So I cannot thank you enough. Adrian, over to you, please.
Thanks, Annie. And I want to talk about how the COVID crisis actually reveals a lot about what we can do and what we need to do on climate through executive action. And Michael was just talking about how important workers are. Essential workers have borne the brunt of the last several months of this crisis. Many of them are Black and Brown workers, and we've seen across the country that Black and Brown communities are actually suffering the most because of this crisis. In New York City here, the Bronx is a COVID epicenter, and it's one of the poorest areas in the country. Actually, the congressional district, 15th New York Congressional District, is the poorest congressional district. And the Bronx also has 7 Superfund sites, some of the highest rates of asthma in the country, and the highest rates of childhood hospitalization for asthma. And we are now seeing the studies come out linking the pollution that people live with the increased risk of death from COVID. We're seeing everywhere the same places that there are pollution hotspots are also where there are COVID hotspots. And so when we think about how we come out of this crisis, it is not separate from how we're addressing the climate crisis. We actually have to tackle and end the persistent violence of pollution inequality if we're also trying to address the public health inequalities and the economic inequalities that people are facing. And so a short-term recovery is cannot just Band-Aid over this historic discrimination. We have to tackle these inequalities head on. And the administration has the ability to use a lot of existing laws and regulation, like the Clean Air Act, to remediate pollution and pollution hotspots. There are a lot of things that that an executive branch can do that are listed in the Climate President Action Plan. And there's a second platform that we worked on called the Frontlines Climate Justice Executive Action Platform that we supported in conversation with the Climate President Action Plan. And this platform addresses some of these things that confront poor communities, Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities the most, and how we leverage existing authority, regulatory authority, to make sure that our climate solutions take into account disproportionate impacts across these communities, that we expand the employment of tools like cumulative impact assessment and regulation through the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, so that we break up these pollution hotspots. And so all of these are tools that exist, things that we have right now. And when we try to talk about how we're going to get out of this current crisis, we have to talk about how we're going to dig into and undo these persistent inequalities. And we have so much available to us to be able to begin on day one to address the climate crisis, the crisis of environmental inequality, the crisis of economic inequality. And that is how we're trying to get our entire movement to mobilize, right? There's a lot of energy around a Green New Deal and a vision for the kinds of legislative solutions that we need, but we need to move quickly, right? And we need to be able to do things that are available to us, available to an executive, a president immediately. And some of these things are the ways that we're going to start mobilizing, start laying the groundwork for the 10-year economic transformation that we need to address the climate crisis and to undo systemic inequality.
Thank you so much. I love that you said these are tools that exist. That is a really important point here. The climate crisis is not an unsolvable problem. Even the IPCC, the top scientific body that issued that report a couple years ago, getting so much attention about how quickly we need to reduce emissions, said the obstacles are political. They are not technical. These tools exist. A number of you have given great examples of what some of these executive orders might be. I want to ask Tamara, do you want to please chime in with another example of what kind of executive order we can be demanding?
Sure, I have a Christmas list of 4 or 7. I think the first one I'd love to see is a special session of Congress to look at the impacts of fossil fuel economies on Black and Brown communities. I think it would be the beginning of connecting all of the misfires on reparations and all of the way that we've handed over our federal government to fossil fuel capitalists. So I want to flag that. The thing that might follow up quickly behind that is an executive order to the Secretary of the Interior to halt fossil fuel leases. So really get into the heart of ending new fossil fuel leases. Everybody's on board for stuff that's on paper we can't afford and wasn't going to happen anyway. But it'd be really great to see some executive leadership on making sure we don't end up here again as the next generation comes to suck the very last bit of life out of our planet. It'd also be really great to see a commitment to work with federal agencies to shut down their subsidies of fossil fuel infrastructure, for states, Congress to complete a plan within the government to phase out its use of fossil fuels, because guess what? Procurement is a huge thing that happens inside the government. So if the only thing we did was stop the government from being a massive consumer of the things that are killing us, it will actually be super effective in concert with a ton of the other ideas that folks have mentioned. So I just wanted to flag that, like, we've watched so much happen to the democracy as executive action has peeled away things that people lived and died for. So the least we could do is start to make a signal that we're going to move in a direction of restoring rights and stopping environmental degradation in any of these ways. I mean, if just one thing we asked for happened, I'd be thrilled.
I actually want all of them, not just one. That was such a delicious list. I absolutely love that. And I hope what it's really showing everybody here today is we know how to do this. In fact, when you look at the climate movement and the challenges that we are facing, we have every single thing that we need to solve them. We have the tools, the policy levers. We have the economic arguments. We have the science is glaring. We have morality and decency and values. We have every single thing. We have the technology, the innovative technologies. We have every single thing that we need to solve these interrelated crises, except one thing, and that is the power to make it so. And that's why we are here today, because that is the one thing we're missing. So I want to do a rapid response of each of you just in a minute or two. We're actually doing well on time, so you can take 2 minutes. I want to ask each of you, what do we do? We are convinced we want these executive actions. We have 10 years, you have 10 days. We want to hold the new president's feet to the fire. How do we each get involved? And remind people also there are great links in the chat box to make sure that you check and put your questions in the Q&As, because after this, we will be moving to questions and discussion. So we'll go in the same order that we started. Jean, what do we do? I want to help. How do I plug in?
Wow, I was hoping we could go backwards. Okay, okay, so immediate steps that we can do. Please open up these platforms that you are seeing here and actually read them, and we will be in touch. Get in touch with us. We are going to mobilize like hell right now, and as soon as the new president hopefully is in power, we are mobilizing like hell to do these things. So please look at those. And in addition, we also have a petition asking the DNC to absolutely adopt these principles and keep fossil fuels in the ground immediately. And we'll also drop that in the box right now too. Okay, next.
Mara, and you can take a little longer. Jean was very concise there. How do we help? And I see there's already a question in the Q&A box about how can movements get involved?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on the movements piece. I think mobilize. I wouldn't be here on behalf of 350 T-shirt, much less 350 Action, if I didn't stress that getting out into the street, recognizing that your neighbors, Black, brown, abled, and disabled, folks who are here to continue, who want to see themselves in the future, need to get into the broader movement conversation, because nothing will cause executive action, congressional action, really the edifice of government to move in a direction we need, other than coordinated effort to demand that climate stays at the top of the list, that in every opportunity that we have, we should be raising it as an international issue, as a domestic issue, as an infrastructure, jobs, and human health issue, recognizing the impact of climate on all of that and the humanity of doing it in a just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive way. Sounds like a thing we could do if enough of us could get into the same parking lot.
All right, Adrian.
Yeah, I am getting so pumped right now by all of this because there's so much that we can do. First of all, I'll point back to the two platforms. These are platforms that hundreds of organizations have signed onto in support and you can still sign on. So if you visit the links on the websites that are in the chat, your organization can sign on in support of the Climate President Action Plan and the Frontlines Climate Justice Executive Action Platform. And then secondly, to kind of echo what Tamara was just saying, we actually need to up the ante and put pressure on the candidates to make sure that climate action and action to address environmental justice is their #1 priority, or one of their top priorities in come January. And the way that I think people can best do that is to stay engaged with some of these organizations, like many of the groups that are here on this panel. I know from conversations with Labor Network for Sustainability, there are like 10 petitions right now that you can sign that our union allies have put out to fight for the PPE and the investment in state and local government stimulus that they need so that essential workers are able to survive during this crisis. And there are many people who are trying to push elected officials to take on Green New Deal policy, to make it a priority for the economic transformation we're hoping, the electoral transformation we're hoping will come in November. And so please, connect to your local 350 chapter. There are many organizations around the country that are members of the Climate Justice Alliance that are moving local grassroots work, feeding the solutions. And we gotta keep up that pressure on the candidates, on our leaders, to make sure that they know that climate justice is a priority from day one.
Excellent, thank you. Anthony.
Yeah, what I would say to people, and this might be a little grim and dark, but it's going to lead to some light stuff too, so don't worry about it. But burn into your consciousnesses the lynching of George Floyd that you all witnessed. Senator Elizabeth Warren, when at Netroots actually 2 or 3 years ago, said that it shouldn't take a YouTube revolution to solidify the fact that Black Lives Matter. People need to burn that into their consciousness. I had a great discussion with Representative McCutcheon a few days ago, and I said that the words "I can't breathe" are very universal. Okay, it doesn't just apply to the lynchings of George Floyd and Eric Gardner. It also applies to toxic emissions that Black, brown, and Indigenous people, they can't breathe every day when they walk outside of their homes in frontline, fence line communities. And this idea of what we're being choked out by is toxic police, toxic policies, and toxic emissions. So when you burn that into your consciousness, hopefully to everything that Adrian and Tamara was just saying, what we've seen this summer is that the principled struggle led to the changes in Minneapolis. We want to go deeper and we want to go further, but it was people coming together, and that's the same type of fervor that we're going to need for this incredible work. I have to tip my hat again to Center for Biological Diversity and to Demos, who just put together an incredible comprehensive package. That was their job, right? I mean, I know Jean, she'll be in the streets with me as well, because that's what Jean does. But but this is also an invitation to all of you to take these words and to make them tangible. We need your help. Frontline communities need your help. So I would also encourage people to go into those communities. There are incredible local grassroots organizations doing work that you may not even know about, that's also going to build power to the incredible work that CBD and Demos have done. So this is not a time to get complacent. I know we hear all the time, this is the most important election of a lifetime. this time that shit is real. I'm a Black man with a 5-year-old Black son, and I'm looking to all of you right now to take care of my son, to take care of me, to take care of Jean and Adrian and Tamara and Michael and all of our Black, brown, and Indigenous people. You know, get into the streets. Now you have a framework. Now we have a narrative. The last thing I'll say, I did put it in the chat. I was so blessed to be able to work with Adrian and Michael on something called a People's Orientation to a Regenerative Economy, which was created by the United Frontline Table. There are 5 points of intervention that I really want people to pay attention to. The narrative, which we represent by seeds, the base building and organizing, which is represented by the water that nourishes the seeds, the policy development, because you cannot have good policy without good organizing, or good executive actions without good organizing. Jean and Adrian are proof of that. They're the most incredible organizers I've ever gotten to work with, and that's why it exists. The fruits that we glean, intervention point number 4, is the electoralization, the people we put into power, and then the closed loop of direct action. And direct action is we have the right to hold people who we put in power accountable to us. And again, I know this is all about unity, Democrats, progressives come together. That's great. On January 21st, I'm telling you right now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we are coming for that ass, and we are going to hold you accountable through the amazing work, and we need all of you to help us do that.
Wrapping up with Michael before we go to questions.
Yeah, all great stuff. And ditto that these platforms should be part of your daily thinking and organizing for your organizations, because we have to be pushing for these demands and starting now. One cautionary tale. So when Bill Clinton issued the executive order on environmental justice, one of the great things that he did was he mandated that every federal agency had to develop an environmental justice program. One of the most challenging things he did was mandate that every federal agency develop an environmental justice program. Because we're talking about a movement at the time that it was still pretty young. And what that meant was that all of a sudden we had all of these advisory tables being set up by every federal government agency, pretty soon the state agencies, and all of our folks are being called into Washington. And some of the organizations were small organizations with big environmental justice fights in their communities. And yet the call was there, and we had to respond to that. So it just speaks again to this whole idea that we need to be thinking about and organizing and preparing for that. We need to prepare just as much for the possibility of defeat as the possibility of victory, because we've often fallen short on sustaining our victories. So people need to be thinking about how are we actually going to implement and actually win in concrete terms what might come out of these executive orders. So get it on your radar, in your agenda right now. Think about not just the winning of it, the policies themselves, but how we're going to actually implement and govern. So.
Thanks. And once again, all the links for these resources are in the chat box. And the main thing we need is a big, broad, mass, inclusive, diverse, powerful, joyful, fierce movement. And so please get involved with these groups, share it on your social media, recruit your members, your allies, your friends, your neighbors, your children, your parents, recruit everybody, because it's going to take all of us to win this. All right, I'm going to move to some questions from the audience. My first question here is for Jean with the Center for Biological Diversity. This is a question about land and ocean preservation. The question says, designation of protected areas and monuments is a power of the executive branch, and scientists say that we need to protect at least 30% of the planet to defend against the worst impacts of climate change. So are marine and land protections part of the Climate President Action Plan? And how can we ensure that equity is core to those?
Wonderful. That's a fantastic question. Oceans and public lands right now are under grave attack, like brown, Black, and Indigenous folks in this country. They are being drilled like hell for fossil fuels, whether it is oil, whether it is fracked gas, whether it is these new methane things in the middle of the ocean that that's a whole other issue about fracking. So what we can do through executive order is actually tell the Secretary of Interior and other agencies who are in charge of oceans areas to stop drilling, just stop completely. That is within presidential power, and that is absolutely what we need to do. And that is the only way that we are actually going to really home in on this crisis is by stopping the bleeding immediately and phasing out all fossil fuel extraction from there. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to support that and say we can't do this work without talking about oceans. I don't think we're talking about it uniquely because unfortunately every part of the biosphere is being attacked by this administration simultaneously. So we're in line for a red new deal, a green new deal, a blue new deal. Like we're about to run out of Roy G. Biv to have new deals. Just want to flag to everybody that like, yes, it's important. We need ocean people, fish people, bay people, tributary people. We need people who not sure what any of those words mean. We need all of y'all in this conversation about mobilizing because there is nothing about this executive that wouldn't carve us up like carp to move past the conversation of climate as we hurtle towards a disaster. So just really want to make sure everybody focuses on the idea that we are not in a quartered, segmented, layered fight. We are in an existential conversation around what the future looks like. And I would be happy for us to argue about degrees once we have assured our survival. So just want to lift up that we're in this together. And if you just keep repeating that to yourself, we will get where we're going.
Yeah, that's a point that literally hits home for me. I mean, you know, my people are from an island that's 8 miles by 32 in the middle of the Pacific. And in that region of Micronesia, that's the largest island out of 2,000 islands in that region. And we're in the Typhoon Alley that goes from the Marianas Islands up through the Philippines. So what Adrian raised earlier. So, and we're already seeing and feeling the impacts of climate change on our livelihoods in Guam. So definitely it's something that for me personally is an absolute priority and would definitely want to see the president be taking bold action to protect oceans.
Excellent. So the answer to that one is yes, yes, and yes. Our final question, and we only have 9 minutes since we get kicked off directly. Oh, we're down to 8 minutes, is about civil disobedience, something close to my heart. I'm so thrilled that one of our audience members, inspired by Martin Luther King and Gandhi, is talking about mass civil disobedience. I believe on climate, being, I think, one of the oldest ones on this panel and having done this for decades, is that we have exhausted the polite levers that our democracy offers us. And at some point, if we just continue to politely ask, we will perish. We have made documentaries and written books and done scientific research and filled out petitions and done permitted marches, and we have literally done everything that our democracy tells us to do. And we have met denial, we have met corporate hijacking of our democracy, and it's at the point where we need to move into the disruption stage. That's what I personally believe, that we've exhausted the polite levers of democracy, and there's a codependency, self-destructive aspect to continuing to politely ask to not be destroyed. That was a lead up. Any thoughts about civil disobedience and how we can get massive civil disobedience at the scale necessary to change the context to make climate action inevitable?
Yeah, I want to take that really quickly, Sister Annie. Like, so first thing, a cautionary tale, especially to my white comrades in struggle. As Dr. West, Cornel West, the great Cornel West teaches us, Brother Martin Luther King, every January is deodorized and sanitized and, you know, Santa Clausified and whatnot. So just be careful with the paternalism, I would say, of telling people about their self-determination, how they are going to struggle against a specific form of oppression, right? The oppression is nuanced, and I'm not going to tell Indigenous folk like my sister Tara Hauska, what's up Tara, I love you, in Minnesota fighting line 3, you know, versus how I'm going to tell people in Ferguson how to do their uprising. So like, let's just be careful of that. But I mean, you said the lead up to it, Annie, you nailed it. You hit it out of the park. I'm not going to ask politely for my fucking survival and for the survival of my 5-year-old Black son. I'm just not. Like, we have tried all of that and it hasn't worked. And every time we have tried it, we seem to get more of a pushback. What is scaring the oppressors right now is after the lynchings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor was all the white, Black, and brown people in the streets together. You know, this was like what Tom Watson and the Populist Party was talking about, had these conversations with Michael of like what it looks like for there to be a solidified working class unity, Black, white, brown, Indigenous, that is what's starting to happen right now. And we need to scare the crap out of our government. I'm all into disruptive stuff, but like, let's make sure that it's disruptive. As the great Eric Michael Dyson says, that if your disobedience did not make people uncomfortable, it was not successful. So I'm begging everybody to learn the difference between direct action and acute catharsis. Acute catharsis is like the prefigurative stuff, and I love all the art and everything, but right now, and Annie, I know you know this because Greenpeace, does it all the time. We need to shut shit down, and that's the type of direct action that I'm looking to do. People like Emily Johnson and the Volve Turners, who shut down all of the pipelines, bringing in Canadian tar sands, all the incredible people who went to Standing Rock, all the people who got arrested for KXL. Greenpeace putting this huge flag right after Trump gets elected that just says resist, like that's the type of thing that, there you go, sister. That is the type of thing that I'm talking about. I love Dr. King, love Gandhi, but they are not coming back to save us. So we're going to have to do this and build new leaders in the process.
If I could add, Annie, I know we're running out of time real quick, that the two things that I've heard in this panel are that we have the solutions and we need to push to make them happen. And as a climate policy person myself, I think there's a lot of us invested in trying to make sure that we design the policies right and that we leverage the tools that we have. And if our elected officials don't want to listen to us, they're not going to listen to us. And so what does pushing look like? It looks like all of the things Anthony was just saying. And when we are talking about fighting for climate justice and pushing on climate justice, it is not in a vacuum. We are in the middle of a moment of resistance, a moment of movement. When we talk about the Black Lives Matter uprisings as in a historical trajectory with the youth climate movement, with Standing Rock, with the civil rights movement, and if we are trying to put climate in the middle of the priorities for a transformation in governance, we have to stand up for Black lives. We have to go into the streets and say, people are dying not just from police bullets, but from pollution in their neighborhoods as well. And that is how we're going to build the mass movement in order to actually build a united front to push our elected leaders to make these policies feel inevitable. We have to give them a sense of that they can't move without us being on their backs. And I think this moment, it's already happening, and we just have to be in solidarity with each other.
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Tamara.
And then MLG.
Sure. I want to jump in quickly and say that 350 will train you. So that'll be showing up. We have a BIPOC climate leadership cohort that's about to change everything that you see on TV and put it in Technicolor. So there's that. The other thing is we are pushing for solidarity schools. We will train you through mass webinars about what it means to look at this work in the long run, what kind of historical background you need to do it and not be a jerk who suppresses people while you show up trying to save the planet. We're really, really focused on how this platform feeds into a better sense of how we work together, because we don't need to rebuild everything that's been lost. So I just want to flag that there are things that are gone that should be gone. And there's a lot that we're looking forward together to do. So get in contact with us at 350.org and 350action.org. We will be training people because this fall is going to be a mess and we should probably organize it together.
And I just wanted to add a quick note that in addition to direct action, we also need to be fighting for the right to protest, right? And this is something I know that Greenpeace has been leading on in fighting these critical infrastructure bills all around the country that are criminalizing people for protesting. And Trump is starting to take that to another level with this new Gestapo that he's establishing. So maybe there's an executive order in there for that as well. But what we need to protect our people while they're out in the streets as well.
Thank you so much for raising that, Michael. Yeah, these bills, so-called critical infrastructure bills, are specifically criminalizing peaceful protest against fossil fuel industries, infrastructure, which is exactly what we need to be protesting. So we are out of time. I want to just summarize. These are big takeaways. Make the president act in line with science. Build a movement. Center equity. And quoting Tamara, don't be a jerk. So those are our to-do list as we leave. I think we can all handle those. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We will see you in the streets. Thank you very much, everybody. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Such a pleasure. If you didn't get your question answered, you know how to reach us all. Check out the chats and the links in the chat box, and please stay in touch because we are building a beautiful movement here, and we need to be a part of it.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you, everybody.